stages of their careers are in crisis. That's according to our guest today. This is Chester Elton. Today on Anxiety at Work, we're talking about how women can better work through uncertainty and take control of their careers. Joining me is my writing partner and my best friend, Adrian Gostick.
Well, thank you, Chester. The pandemic really has magnified this gender divide in our workplaces, especially for those in the early stages of their careers. And our guest today will address how women can create more dynamic, fulfilling careers, and for all of us, how their managers can better lead women to create more meaningful careers and organizations. So, Chester.
Who is this amazing guest, you might ask? It's Christy Hunter Arscott. She's the author of the book Begin Boldly, How Women Can Reimagine Risk, Embrace Uncertainty, and Launch a Brilliant Career, that will be published August 2nd of this year. A Rhodes Scholar, she has been named by Thinkers 50 as one of the top management thinkers likely to shape the future of business. Her article, Why So Many 30-Something Women Are Leaving Your Company, was selected for the Harvard Business Review collection of the top articles on diversity. Her corporate clients include Bacardi, Deloitte, PwC, HSBC, and more. She has a bachelor's degree in political science from Brown University and 2 master's degrees with a focus on gender research from the University of Oxford. Way more educated than both you and I combined, Adrian. We are delighted to welcome Christy Hunter Arscott to our humble podcast. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Chester, and thank you, Adrian. It's great to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. This is such an important topic. And as I've been reading more of your information, you say studies show 1 in 4 women say they're thinking about leaving the workplace or downshifting in their careers. And you say this career stagnation is due to lower levels of satisfaction, less compensation, and generally weaker confidence and aspiration compared to the men in their field. So help us understand, why are so many women feeling helpless? And more importantly, what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's honestly a complex issue. If there was a silver bullet that I had figured out by now, we wouldn't be here. But there's many different factors contributing to this. And I should stress that it looks different often by industry or location, whether you're in the US or other countries. There could be other cultural factors at play as well. But it's very easy sometimes just to think women leave because of babies. And years ago, I did a study and I asked, with my research partner, Lauren Noel, we went out and asked executives why women were leaving. And they said because of kids. And when we asked women why they were leaving, it was actually very different. It was compounding factors over time. So a child or parenthood may be a final straw, but it is rarely the only contributing factor. So one thing that came up in our interviews was that women really cared about compensation, and they were aware of the fact that they were being paid less than their male peers, but they also felt like they were receiving harsher consequences for negotiation, that sometimes things would backfire. It may be lack of visible role models or people that looked like them. And there's all of this research that says aspiration is directly linked to visibility. Well, if you're in an organization with no visible female role models, your aspirations and confidence for those roles is going to be impacted. Harvard's done research on this, and the quote that comes out of it that I always think about is, "You cannot be what you cannot see." There may also be other things, bias. There's a lot of work on affinity bias and the fact that we're more likely to give actionable feedback to people that are like us and vague to others, and that can become very frustrating. It may be that we're more likely to give high-value assignments to people that we feel familiar with, and that may be someone of the same gender versus someone of difference. So it's interesting because I think about like a leaky pipeline, and part of the reason I wrote this book is I've said that, only focusing on senior level women is comparable to just plugging that final fissure when there have been leaks all along the way. And similarly, when we say it's because of babies, there's all these other leaks or things that are compounding along the way, and then that might be a final straw. Or it may be there's this image on the top of like one book that's around microaggressions in the workplace, and it's a pin doll and it has all these little pins in it. And each time someone doesn't give you actionable feedback or, doesn't invite you to a certain event, or you don't see any role models like you know your compensation's less. That's a lot of pins and aggregate to deal with over time. So again, long answer, but it's complex.
Well, it makes all the sense in the world, though, right? You've got all these little things that build up.
Yeah.
And it's just easier to say, I'm just going to have a baby. I'm out. Just drop the mic and walk off. You talk about in your book about being bold, this boldness. So how can individuals be more bold after all the things you just talked about, with all the worry about failure and I don't have the right role models and I don't really fit in, and especially for those that are living with anxiety?
Yeah. Great questions. And that's the whole purpose of this book is I'm not encouraging women to go out there and be reckless and take reckless risks without considering the unique gender factors that we face. And I'm saying, let's be bold with a toolkit. So your focus on anxiety, right? We don't just say, don't be anxious, because we know that's not realistic. Right. We say, what are the tools and methods and ideas and ways of reframing things that can help us manage anxiety, right? And this is exactly the same conversation. What are the tools and tips and techniques and conversations that we can have to manage our careers and be strategic about it in the most meaningful way? And so oftentimes women will think, gosh, well, I have the option of taking a risk and potentially facing backlash or loss, or not taking a risk and just upholding the status quo, and then they feel helpless. But what I'm offering is a solution to help you work around those areas and actually give you a method for risk taking. And so, Chester, to your point, for people grappling with anxiety, I am not, you probably even see risk in the title and think that book is not for me, right? And it's actually quite the opposite. I am not telling you to jump off of a cliff with a blindfold on and you've never been paragliding before and go for it. I'm giving you almost a roadmap and a toolkit to navigate. And that's exactly what we need also to manage our anxiety more. Say, I have the methods and mindsets to execute on this and to deal with any outcome.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm the youngest of 5 boys, and my older brothers used to tell me to do stuff like that all the time. Just close your eyes. Here's a bed sheet. There's ropes on it. You'll jump off the roof. Trust me, it's a parachute. So yeah, I'm very familiar with unguided and unwanted risk in my life. But just one quick question. Give me one of those tools in your toolkit. Yeah.
Sure. So one way is how to assess a risk and make a decision around it, because sometimes we see risks or opportunities or challenges and we think we don't even have a way. We kind of just get, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And so it's called the Bold Moves method, which relates to the name of the book. And that's because it's an acronym. So M is for motivation. I want you to think about what is your motivation for taking this risk and crystallize a motivation that matters. And I give people a way to do that, looking at some red flags of motivations that won't maintain momentum. So really isolating that. The next is what's the opportunity and what's the opportunity cost. And the reason why I do this, and you've probably heard this so many times in relation to anxiety, but the language that we use can either elicit action or inhibit action. And that's what I found. So for all of us standing here and listening to this around the use of language, if we're grappling with anxiety, I mean, one thing I talk about is don't call it networking, call it connecting. Negotiation is reframed as making an ask. Self-advocating for yourself is more powerful and more likely to elicit action than saying self-promotion. So there's all of these language shifts that happen from day one in this book in regards to O is opportunity. So reframing a risk as an opportunity to make a bold move is more likely to increase your appetite for it. Also thinking about the opportunity cost, facing up front, what are the trade-offs? The V is for vision. Our brains, particularly if we're anxious, are more likely to think of worst case scenarios. That's our kind of tendency. But the V in vision is thinking about what's my best case scenario outcome? What am I doing, seeing, feeling? And that's because we want to isolate that to counteract the tendency to over catastrophize around some of these outcomes. And then the E is an end game plan. And this is again about managing if you're feeling anxious. This is not about avoiding failure. This is about saying, irrespective of the outcome, I can figure it out. What's my end game plan if I get this promotion, get this role, get this? How will I step up to the plate? And then it's also, if it doesn't work out, what's my end game plan there? And just being realistic about that. And then the S is support. And this goes back to really the fact that a lot of my research with very successful senior level women, they've said no woman's an island. You know, connectivity is so important to our success. So I break down the S in moves in terms of really your stakeholders, your success advisors, and your safety net. So that's the moves: motivation, opportunity cost, vision, end game plan, and then support.
Which I think leads us really well into the idea of what leaders can do. Because if you're trying to create this culture, and you're not talking about boldness for boldness' sake. You're talking about a culture of courage where bold actions are celebrated. People can take risks and creative things can happen. It's amazing. As Chester and I go in to do speeches in companies, almost inevitably the CEO or the senior leader will say, get them to take more risks. And we'll say, you need to be doing that, but we can talk about it, but they have to feel safe, right? So how do leaders go about creating this culture of courage?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many things they could do. And I love the concept. That's actually one of the titles of a talk I give to organizations, which is how do you cultivate that culture of courage? And one thing that's worth mentioning too is we have to pull both levers. We can empower individuals and equip them to be risk takers, but we also have to work on the organizational side, and I do both. And so one thing is that I talk about in my book, and the whole framework of it is the risk, reward, refine, repeat model, which is essentially simple, and it's intentionally simple, almost like someone could paste it up on their wall. And the idea is you encourage people to take a risk, assess the rewards, and failures are a type of reward. So you're reimagining failure. You're saying failure is not fatal. What are you learning? To infuse the next step, which is refining. And the idea here is, are we going to let the outcomes of our risk-taking define us or refine us? And when we're anxious and fearful and we're not cultivating this culture for others or taking action ourselves, we believe we failed, we are a failure. And that's an outcome identity conflation. We don't want that. We want the outcomes of risk-taking to refine us, and then we repeat. So something I talk about in the book is like, how do you create a risk, reward, refine, repeat ritual in your company so you can touch base, and there's a method to do that. I also have a chapter on agile experimentation, which is the idea if you encourage your employees to view things as short-term experiments, it's incredibly powerful. So the idea that you could, instead of saying, and it's very good for the employee too, because you become more persuasive. So an example is, let's say I want to dedicate a certain percentage of my week to working on strategic projects or something, specific in the company, but it's not in my main role. Instead of saying, let me change my entire role description, what if I came to you, Adrian and Chester, and said, I would like to try this for a month. What if I dedicate this percentage of my time for a month? We'll decide what success looks like. What are the metrics that matter? Maybe my continued productivity or my client sales or whatever area you're in. And at the end of the month, we'll decide whether we refine this experiment, whether we continue it, etc. And it's a great way to argue for more flexibility, to think about that. So creating a culture of experimentation in your company that embraces short-term experiments before scaling is another great way.
Unbelievable. I mean, I really love the idea of the reward. The failure can be part of the reward.
Yes.
I mean, it really can. Yeah.
It's the most important reward sometimes.
Yeah, the refining process. I apologize for the pause there. You gave us so much information. I was kind of like, that is really good stuff. I got to make sure I write this down.
I know. I've been taking lots of notes. This is really good.
Yeah. You have a wonderful concept. This idea that you manage your career like an investment portfolio. Now, at this point in time, while we're recording this podcast, most people's financial portfolio has taken quite a hit over the last little while. So how do you go about doing that? How do you go about managing your career portfolio?
Sure. So there's a couple things to think about. And one is imagining one big risk as the end-all be-all makes it harder to do, okay? And so we often overinflate the impact of one big risk or move and underestimate the impact of incremental risks or courageous acts taken over time. And so we'll in this world of social media, it'll be the person that wrote a book or changed jobs or anything, but we underestimate the tiny gains and the compounding returns from those everyday investments and acts. An investment portfolio, thinking about your career as an investment portfolio, means we're not just making one big risk. We're not just making one big investment. You would never have an investment portfolio and just make one big one and let it, you'd say, what am I investing in over time? And so the question is, do you want a portfolio that lies stagnant? Or do you want one that's continuously fueled by an approach to risk and an ongoing approach? The other key, to your point, is around diversification. You don't want just risks in one area. You want to kind of spread the risk across the portfolio. So it's that process of not making one big investment and overinflating that. And it's also the process of diversifying. And the last bit is it's important to start early. So I use this analogy in the book, and I say, imagine a snowball rolling off a mountain. And if you start earlier in your career, kind of at the top there, you've got more of a runway down for it to grow in size over time. If you start making risks later in your career, it's almost like you're halfway down or later down that mountain. It's the same as an investment portfolio. You'll have less time to get those compounding returns. However, I say that if you're not taking risks right now, the best time to start is now, irrespective of where you are in your career.
It's such great advice, and what much of what you're telling is actually, begin boldly, but begin boldly in a very smart and organized manner, and so I love the idea. This is really helpful for anybody who does have anxiety. So, how do people learn more about your work, Christy? Where would you send them?
Sure. So my website's my name. It's christyhunterarscott.com. So you can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram under the same, just under my name. And then in terms of, you can learn more about my book there as well. And you've already touched a little bit upon this, but it's not just for early career women. It's for individuals at any stage of their career. And it's also helpful to leaders who might want to start a women's program. It's written like a curriculum. It can be for a book group. There's exercises at the end of each, because to manage anxiety, we actually have to do. We can't overanalyze. And I talk about this in the book. We cannot get stuck in that cycle of analysis paralysis. And we often overanalyze and then either never act or act too late. And so I'm pushing people more on the side of, there's a section in each chapter called Aspiration to Action, because I found people aspire to take risks, but really struggle to take action. And how do you close that gap? So I give everyone kind of the tools to do that, because we should act, then analyze. So that's part of the focus. So yes, my website, and then that'll give you more information on the book as well.
Well, and that also leads to this idea that you talk about, this agile experimentation, where you take action in the face of uncertainty. So walk us through a little bit about that and how that works.
Yeah, so that is it's a process that you have that you can apply to so many different areas of your life. And I'm just looking, even if I have my book in front of me, so I could actually show you since we're on video, but yeah, here we go. So we start with isolating intent, which is really your motivation again. And the reason why I say isolate intent and motivation and all of these different models is, I say when the going gets tough, refocus on your why. And there's these quotes that he or she who has a strong enough why can endure anyhow. And I suffer from feeling anxious when I get up in front of thousands of people or making these kind of career moves. But when I refocus on that why, that motivation or intent maintains my momentum. So it's talking about isolating that in your experiment, approaching everything with a process of inquiry. And in the book, I walk through in this experimentation model, like what are the critical questions that you ask in the inquiry phase? What do we know already? What are our unknowns? Where has this been tried before, etc.? Then the next stage is ideation. And that's really brainstorming, because often we're very quick to say, I can't do this, and this is the only option. And really there's usually multiple ways to solve or experiment to solve a similar issue. So the other day I was on a call with someone and she said, I want to scale my business, but I don't want to have too much of an overhead, and so I'm not going to scale. And I was like, well, let's go back and ideate. You could outsource, you could look at, so there's so many other things. And then you experiment, and then you look at the outcomes and impact of the experiment to evolve. And so this again is something you could apply to anything. So one idea could be like, imagine thinking about division of work at home, right? Imagine you said to your partner, I don't want to do the drop-offs for our children anymore. I want you to take that over, right? That's unlikely to get a resounding response or yes. But if you said, look, I feel like I'd like to try if in the next month you do 2 days and I'll do the 3, and we'll see how it works at the end. Are the kids happy? Are we happy? And then we can come back and look at it again. Or I'd like to try this. And so this process of time-constrained experiments is built upon the work and research of Stu Friedman, who's out of Wharton, who's a phenomenal researcher on in the work-life space. And so this kind of idea of experimentation can be applied to picking up a new hobby, negotiating at work, thinking about new interest, looking at your division of work at home. So it really transcends work and life.
You know, what I really appreciate that you've done in your book, and I wrote it down here, is that aspiration to action. Mm-hmm. You know, this absolute roadmap. You know, there's so many places you can go and, oh, the great ideas. How do I actually do it? And so thank you so much for making it, you know, like you say, it's a textbook, it's a book club, it's your road to taking risks that, well, dare I say, that can begin boldly.
Yeah. Well, Chester,
a fine book.
No, go ahead. It's interesting. You're thanking me, and I appreciate that, because I'm really passionate about how you bridge theory and practice. But the people that I have to thank are truly the people that I interviewed, because they were the one that were calling for this. When I interviewed women at the earlier stages of their career, I heard that inspiration is fleeting. We go to conferences, we read stories of other women, and we want more than this is how I did it. We want this is how you can do it too. And so that insight was so crystallizing for me that then created the impetus for that exact aspiration to action that you just mentioned.
Well, good for you. You know, and that's part of the process, right? Is the listening. What do people really need? Hey, you know, we talk about in our book, Anxiety at Work, that uncertainty is a big driver of anxiety. So what else do you say to counseling women in their careers to take charge and reduce that uncertainty?
So I feel like uncertainty is a natural part of life. I'm giggling because I don't know if I have a lot of answers around reducing uncertainty, but I have options and tools for reducing angst around uncertainty, right? And so I think it's interesting because I think facing failure and facing uncertainty are just critical elements to building a rich and meaningful life and existence and career. And so instead of trying to control things and avoid uncertainty, I think we'd be better off putting our kind of efforts and energy into creating a plan for uncertain outcomes and how will we deal with it. And Marie Forleo, that runs the online business school, and she's also one of Oprah's, I think, thought leaders. She says she wrote this book and it's called Everything's Figure-Outable. And I love that word because I think we have to have faith that we can figure things out. And part of the MOVES framework is giving us a way that even in the face of uncertainty, we have an end game plan, we have support. And so that'll allow us to deal with it better. And then I'm going to give you another analogy that's in my book. I said, look, like change is hard and uncertainty is hard. And imagine we're a sailor going out and the most skilled sailor does not like uncertain stormy seas. You know, we don't love that. But imagine a storm's coming and you just say, gosh, I can't handle this. It's uncertain. The outcome's uncertain. And so the reaction would then be pull down the sails, lock up the deck and get below board and just let fate take its course. But if we're truly intentional when we're facing change or uncertainty, that storm, we're going to get at the helm. We're going to, take that wheel and do our best efforts, to navigate those stormy seas. And I think stormy seas are a part of a rich life. They just are. And so we're better thinking about how will we equip ourselves to navigate them rather than try and prevent them altogether. I tell people in the book, I say, when we face change, and I have a whole chapter on agile change, we have a choice. We can either choose resistance or response. And we can take control over that response. And it can be a strategic response as long as we prepare for a range of outcomes. So
I love that because I know people in my life, probably we all do, their whole goal in life is just to avoid any conflict at all and just make sure everything's smooth. And unfortunately, that's not life.
No.
But we gain from it and we learn from it. So I love that analogy. So walk us through, okay, you're a busy professional. How do you keep your mental health, your emotional fitness at a level that you need? What are some of your daily practices, Christy?
I pull a lot of different levers because it hasn't always been easy for me, and I've definitely gone through many highs and lows in terms of grappling with emotions and anxiety, and there's no way in a super pressurized time that you're not going to feel some level of angst. So I'll tell you a little bit about my practices, and then I'd love to tell you a little bit more about like some just simple reframing that's really helped me or insights. But for me, this is just common. I mean, for me, getting outside is essential, number one. And then the other thing is, for me, also exercises. And there have been times where I am so busy and there is nothing else that I almost isolate myself to write or speak, and then you lose sight and suddenly you wake up. It's such a lesser version of yourself. And there was a time when I was in consulting in New York, and I worked 18-hour days, and I felt like I lost the plot for a little while. So so it took a while to gain some more insights around that. But I also wanted to share, more than anything, I think it's my mindset. And there's certain mindset shifts that have been really, really important for me. So one was years ago, I was giving a talk at Harvard Business School, and this amazing professor, Allison Wood Brooks, you should look her up if you've never met her, have her on your show. She's a ball of energy and intellect. And she talked about the fact that we used to see those signs, keep calm and carry on, right? And she said it doesn't work when you're anxious and your anxiety levels are high. Telling yourself to be calm, it just does not work. It actually can have the other effect. But she said there have been these studies done that even if you tell yourself you're excited, it works because and I'm not going to explain this properly because it's not my research, but your physiological response to anxiety and excitement is very similar. So it's less of a leap than saying, stay calm. And so instead of like when I'm getting up to speak in front of hundreds, which I did for the first time since COVID, like this spring, it's not stay calm. It's I'm excited. It's that mental mind shift and that simple trick. And the research around that is actually really, really compelling. The other thing is when I feel an emotion, it is that, an emotion. It is not my identity. So again, I talk about that conflation. I don't like an emotion identity conflation. So instead of saying, let's say I would identify myself as an anxious person, I would not say I am an anxious person. I would say I'm a person that is feeling anxiety. And it just creates this separation for me in terms of my identity and who I am versus something I am experiencing is really important. So these kind of simple tricks for me are very, very powerful. The last thing I will share is one of the things is that we hear a lot about the inner critic. And for women, this can be one of the most anxiety-provoking things. Similarly, it can be for men. And so one thing I always say is, this is another trick. It is actually impossible to silence your inner critic and ignore it. So instead, the better tactic is to have a response to it. So I, for a long time, was like, every time it came up, I used to silence it. Didn't work. It was still there. Now, instead of that, I have a response. So for a while, my response was like, I hear you, but I got this. I hear you, but I got this. And that acknowledgement and then a response is so powerful. And I just worked with a group of high school girls, and they all came up with their response to their inner critic. And it was fascinating. Like, I hear you, but I'm better than this. Or I hear you, but I believe in more. Or I want a bolder existence. And it was so, so powerful. So those are the things that I really do in terms of my emotional management.
I am such a fan of inner speak. I am so glad you went there. To be instead of your harshest critic, be your best friend.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. we say things to ourselves that we would never say to somebody that we cared about. So you say, well, what would my best friend say to me when I get this anxious? He would say, you're better than this. You've got this.
Yes.
You're going to be great. I'm cheering for you. That is such a wonderful, now my job is to say, okay, if you wanted people to remember one or two things from the conversation today, what would it be? And yet I'm looking at my notes here and I've got like 30. So what are the two things that you would say, hey, if you didn't remember anything, please remember these two things?
I want to give you one thing that's actually new rather than something, because I think it's a very powerful, enduring tactic for people, particularly those that are grappling with anxiety at work. And that is to choose courage over confidence. And I think that to date, we have put too much focus on encouraging people to try to feel confident before making bold moves and not enough on courage. And what my research has shown is that the most amazing, successful women don't show, and anyone in their careers, they don't show up confidently every day. I've interviewed some of the world's top leaders and I get on and they're saying, why are you interviewing me? What interest? And it's so interesting. They come and they show that self-doubt. But what they are is courageous in the absence of confidence. If we wait to feel confident before we do anything, we are never going to get anything done. So let's stop the focus on confidence. Be courageous even in the face of self-doubt, even when you are lacking confidence, even in the face of fears and uncertainty. And then confidence is the byproduct or output, but we need to flip the script on that. So if it's okay with you, I mean, that's really the one thing other than what I've mentioned that I just want people choose courage over confidence.
I feel like I should be saying amen and hallelujah.
I know. Yeah, this is
one
really
of the best
inspiring.
sermons that I've
it
ever
really
had.
Is. Yeah, really inspiring. This has been so great. Christy Hunter Arscott, the new book, Begin Boldly. Pick up a copy. And thank you so much, Christy, for being on the podcast today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Chester.
Well, Chess, really fascinating. So good for us to consider women in the workplace. And don't we hear this so often is that, why are women leaving? Well, they had a baby or family issues. And I love Christy's research that says, not so much. That was the last straw on the camel's back.
Yeah. It's so interesting. We always say to each other, so what were a couple of your takeaways? I've got like 500 takeaways. So practical. I love that as she would talk to women in business, the takeaway was, don't inspire me, give me the roadmap. Show me how to do it. Your story is great. How do I do that? And so her book is full of those great takeaways. A couple of things that I wrote down was the don't over-catastrophize. This catastrophic attitude that we have, we think of all the things that can go wrong. And it paralyzes us. And I so appreciated her way of saying, you've got to reframe that and say, it's an opportunity. Think of all the things that can go right and why you should act boldly. Just brilliant.
Well, I like the bold moves method, and some of what you're talking about is under there, right? Is like, first off, what's my motivation for taking this risk? What's the opportunity cost or opportunity that could be gained? And reframing, some of the language. Instead of networking, it's connecting. Instead of self-promoting, it's self-advocating. How can we be a little kinder to ourselves? The idea of vision. What's the worst case scenario? Instead of that, thinking about the best case scenario. Love that. And thinking about the end game and getting support, which is huge on this. How often do we feel like, well, I'm going to go do this big thing and I guess I'm all on my own, instead of realizing, let's find the support before we begin.
Yeah, and surrounding yourself with all those good people, right? She said you can't become what you can't see. I thought that was really interesting. All the more reason to, connect and have those relationships so that you can see people like you that have achieved and surround yourself. Risk, reward, refine, repeat. It almost reminds me of the directions on the back of the shampoo bottle. Rinse and repeat. Although for those of you that know me, I haven't needed shampoo for generations.
That's a big move for you. Yeah.
But what is the risk? What is the reward? And the reward can also be failure because of what you can learn from that. Refine your approach and then do it again. I love that cycle, that discipline.
Yeah. And I love the companies we work with that really get to that mindset where they go, what do you mean? A mistake's happened? Awesome. What can we learn from it? And they get so excited, and they, instead of, well, what did you do, Elton? Knucklehead? No, they go, you have a problem. You are not the problem. I just love that way of thinking. And I like a way of, coming back to our careers as well. You don't think, and I see this so often, especially with younger people, should I go get my MBA? Should I leave and open up a fruit stand at the end of my driveway? They think of these big moves, and what she's saying is, no. It's don't overinflate those. It's the incremental moves that will build our portfolio over time.
Yeah, and that great idea of the portfolio, a diversified portfolio. You don't always have to make the big move right away. Say, hey, look, can I take a month and take a percentage of my time and go do this and go do that? I also really appreciated the snowball analogy. The sooner you start, the bigger your snowball. And then she came back and said, and by the way, if you haven't started, now is the best time to start. So don't think after I've said that I'm mid-career, I'm done. Start your snowball as soon as you can. Diversify your portfolio and get that momentum.
And
really,
use
so many great takeaways.
And I love this too. Use time-constrained experiments, which is much better. Instead of I think we need to do this big change. Let's try this for a month. Let's try halfway there. I think that's a really powerful way to say, as she was saying, in our stormy seas, you either accept it, you batten the hatches, you go below decks, or you fight it out. And so I love that idea. So last thing for me was the idea, maybe you wrote this too, was the inner critic, is that, and I don't know if we've had somebody on the show who said, you have to acknowledge the inner critic. You can't just ignore it. In reframing it, you acknowledge it. I hear you, but I got this. I love that mantra.
Yeah, your inner critic. Do you have a response rather than, oh yeah, that's that inner critic? Just have a response. My last takeaway, and I wrote this down, and this has got to become like a life mantra or a poem or something. Stormy seas are part of a rich life. It's so funny. I talk about my dad all the time. I'll never forget my dad. We had this little porch off the back of our place in West Vancouver, and it had this. It wasn't a tin, but it was asbestos when asbestos was a good thing. And
that explains a lot. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Anyway, he used to love to go sleep out there during a big storm. In Vancouver, we'd get these torrential downstorms. He loved the noise on the roof. And he would get so excited about these storms. And when she said, stormy seas are a part of a rich life, I just remember as a kid, my dad and I being on the porch under this big blanket. And he was just so delighted that this force of nature was coming down. And that he enjoyed it. He wasn't afraid of it. He enjoyed it. So
in Vancouver, there'd be a lot of opportunity for that, which is a way of reframing the rain instead of, another rainy day. It's like, how exciting. That's so fun. I love that.
Invigorating. Yeah. Well, listen, we want to say thank you to all of you that have tuned in to our podcast. We know you've got a lot of things going on and you've given us your time. We hope you've had some wonderful takeaways. Well, none of this happens without our wonderful producer, Brent Klein. He takes all the mess and makes it into a masterpiece. And to Christy Lawrence, who helps us find amazing guests. And again, to all of you that have tuned in, if you've liked the podcast, please share it. Give us a review. And Adrian, what else can they do to share this and make this vibrant with their friends?
Well, join our community at the Culture Works, where we're creating a safe place to talk about anxiety and wellness at work. And we love speaking to audiences around the world, virtually or in person, on the topics of wellness, resilience. So give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about your event and especially pick up our book, Anxiety at Work, wherever fine books are sold.
And just to quote Christy for one last time, choose courage over confidence. Show up with courage every day. It'll help tamp down your anxiety. It'll make the storm more interesting and invigorating. And we just really appreciate your time. Tune in again, please.